July 1950s. The aircraft carrier USS Coral Sea slices through the Atlantic swells, its deck alive with the roar of early jet engines. From the island bridge, Vice Admiral Frederick M. Trapnell watches as two McDonnell F-2H Banshees launch side by side a double-line takeoff method he personally devised. Few sailors on deck know the quiet man in command has shaped almost every aircraft they fly. Yet every naval aviator strapping into a cockpit, from the fragile biplanes of the 1920s to the supersonic jets of the space age, owes something to this soft-spoken engineer pilot. History would call him the godfather of modern naval aviation. Trapnell's genius wasn't in chasing headlines or racking up combat kills. His gift was vision, understanding how engineering, relentless testing, and fearless flying could pull U.S. naval aviation decades ahead of its time. Over 3 decades, he logged more than 6,000 flight hours in 162 aircraft types, shaping everything from the Navy's first torpedo bombers and flying boats to iconic warplanes like the F4U Corsair and F6F Hellcat, and finally the jets that would dominate the Cold War and launch astronauts into space. But his path was anything but simple. It stretched from the days of open cockpit biplanes and experimental airships to kamikaze attacks, typhoon-tossed carriers, and the unforgiving dawn of the jet age. Trapnell combined the mind of an engineer with the courage of a combat pilot, turning failures into breakthroughs and saving countless lives along the way. This is the story of a man few outside naval circles have heard of, yet whose fingerprints are on every modern carrier deck. To understand the Navy's leap from canvas wings to Mach-breaking jets, and even to the astronauts who carried its traditions to the moon, we begin with a boy born in 1902 who simply loved the sea and the sky, a time when powered flight itself was still a dream. Raised along the American coast, he grew up with a natural love for the sea and ships, drawn to the endless horizon and the mechanical beauty of vessels cutting through water. This fascination led him to an appointment at the United States Naval Academy, where he graduated in 1923. There, classmates quickly noticed his gift for engineering and mathematics. While many midshipmen preferred drills or athletics, Trapnell could often be found bent over blueprints, fascinated by the physics of hydrodynamics and the way machines worked. His early naval career began in the traditional way service aboard battleships and cruisers. From the start, he earned the respect of sailors and officers alike, not as a distant officer but as a man willing to work shoulder to shoulder with the crew. He climbed into cramped engine spaces, helped troubleshoot mechanical problems, and listened to seasoned petty officers. Those habits of hands-on learning and team trust would define his entire career. During these early years, aviation was still a small, daring branch of the Navy. The service's fragile scout biplanes were seen more as a novelty than as strategic tools. Yet every time one of those fabric-winged machines droned overhead, Trapnell's curiosity grew. He studied their movements from the deck and questioned pilots whenever he could. By 1926, he had made a decision that would change naval aviation forever. Trapnell applied for flight training at Naval Air Station Pensacola in Florida. It was there that his engineering mind met his natural pilot instincts. When he earned his gold wings in March 1927, the Navy gained not just another aviator but a future architect of its entire aerial future. With his wings freshly pinned in March 1927, Lieutenant Frederick Trapnell stepped into an aviation world still finding its identity. Assigned to Torpedo Squadron 1 aboard the brand-new aircraft carrier USS Lexington, he flew the 3-seat Martin T-3M torpedo bomber, a lumbering biplane of wood, wires, and fabric. Carrier aviation was experimental and dangerous, but Trapnell was captivated. He studied every airplane's quirks, spending extra hours learning its strengths and weaknesses, and he wrote precise notes that would become a hallmark of his career. In 1928, Lexington joined fleet exercises off Hawaii, and Trapnell began testing and evaluating the Navy's evolving bombers. His skill soon earned him a spot in the Navy's first officially designated fighter squadron, VB-1, later VF-5, the legendary Red Rippers, flying the quick and agile Curtiss F-6C Hawk. A carrier-capable version of the Army's P-1, he discovered the thrill of nimble aerobatics. Veteran pilots like Lieutenant Matthias Gardner mentored him in coordinated air tactics, combining dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters into the team-based strategies that would dominate future carrier warfare. Trapnell's natural flying instincts showed early. During his first close formation flight with Ace Lieutenant Jimmy Barner, a challenge that usually required several attempts, he performed so smoothly that Barner shook his hand and welcomed him aboard after a single trial. By early 1929, the Red Rippers were flying nearly every day during intense Pacific Fleet exercises in the Panama Canal Zone, sharpening tactics to protect one of America's most critical waterways. Later that year, while testing the brand-new Boeing F-4B, Trapnell survived an engine fire by bailing out over Kearney Mesa, earning his place in the elite Caterpillar Club, reserved for pilots saved by parachute. These formative years in fragile biplanes gave Trapnell more than flying hours. They built the fearless test pilot who would later rewrite naval aviation, blending daring skill with an engineer's eye for improvement. By late 1929, Trapnell's reputation for clear technical thinking and fearless flying brought a new challenge: the Navy's flight test section at NAS Anacostia in Washington, D.C. here. He encountered the future of aviation from the inside, testing every airplane on the field and refining his sharp understanding of aerodynamics. Fellow test pilot Robert Pine later said, "I believe he is the best pilot and probably the best test pilot I have ever been associated with." The early 1930s offered an unexpected detour. At the time, Admiral William Moffett, chief of the Bureau of Aeronautics, championed a radical idea: enormous dirigibles as flying aircraft carriers for long-range scouting. The Navy's pride was the USS Akron, built to carry small Curtiss F-9 C-2 Sparrowhawk fighters in a bay beneath its massive frame. Trapnell was assigned to help perfect the daring system that would lower and recover fighters mid-air using a mechanical trapeze. Initially, the system was dangerous and unreliable. Drawing on his engineering skills, Trapnell redesigned the hookup mechanism, making it more stable and easier to engage. His improvements helped Akron and her sister ship USS Macon become operational, briefly proving the concept of airborne scouting. But nature had the final word. On April 3, 1933, as Trapnell prepared to fly a ferry plane out to the airship, a violent Atlantic storm battered the coast. Delays kept him grounded, and by dawn, he learned the devastating news. Akron had crashed into the sea, killing Admiral Moffett and all but 3 crew members. Trapnell had narrowly missed death and lost many friends. Despite his efforts, the dream of giant airships faded after Macon also crashed in 1935. Yet these years gave Trapnell priceless experience in high-risk testing and systems engineering, sharpening the judgment that would define his wartime and jet-age breakthroughs. With the airship era fading, Frederick Trapnell turned fully toward the work that would define his life: rigorous flight testing. In 1936, he joined Patrol Squadron 10 in Hawaii, where he helped shape the Navy's emerging long-range reconnaissance strategy. Early in 1938, he commanded a record-setting deployment of consolidated PBY Catalinas, flying 2,550 miles nonstop from California to Hawaii in 20.5 hours, a feat that confirmed seaplanes could patrol the vast Pacific without airship support. Back in the United States, Trapnell immersed himself in evaluating nearly every prototype and production aircraft the Navy and Marine Corps acquired. He tested the pioneering Northrop XBT-1 dive bomber and the Vought XF4U-1 Vindicator, helping identify shortcomings that led to the rugged Douglas SBD Dauntless, a star of early Pacific battles. He combined an engineer's precision with a pilot's feel, noting not just performance numbers but subtle handling traits that might save or cost lives in combat. By 1940, Trapnell had logged more than 3,800 hours in 80 types of aircraft, an astonishing breadth for the era. His reports emphasized the importance of manufacturer collaboration during development, an idea that was revolutionary at the time. He believed test pilots should work side by side with designers to fix problems before production. That approach shortened timelines dramatically and helped the Navy field modern aircraft faster than any adversary. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, Trapnell wanted to join the fight immediately, but the Navy saw a bigger mission for him. His ability to translate combat needs into engineering solutions was too valuable to risk in the front line. Instead, he doubled down at NAS Anacostia, flying long hours and shaping the next generation of warplanes work that would soon prove critical as the Pacific War escalated. The morning of December 7, 1941, brought shock and fury to America as Japanese aircraft devastated Pearl Harbor. For Frederick Trapnell, now a seasoned commander and chief test pilot at NAS Anacostia, the attack underscored a simple truth. The war in the Pacific would be decided in the air. He immediately volunteered for combat duty, but naval leaders refused. Trapnell's unique blend of engineering insight and fearless flying was far too valuable to risk on the front lines. Instead, he threw himself into a new kind of warfare: accelerated aircraft development. Working 12-hour days, often 7 days a week, he tested and fine-tuned every major fighter and bomber the Navy was rushing into service. Among them were the Grumman F-4F Wildcat and Brewster F-2 a Buffalo, but the most daunting was the radical Vought F4U Corsair. Its inverted gull wings and long nose created severe stability problems and landing accidents. In late 1942, Trapnell traveled to Vaught's plant in Stratford, Connecticut, to fly the troubled prototype himself. Pushing it to 402 miles per hour, a world record for a production piston fighter at the time, he recognized its incredible potential. Returning to Anacostia, he methodically worked with Vought engineers to correct the Corsair's flaws, helping to create one of the most celebrated fighters of World War II. Trapnell also championed early, continuous collaboration with aircraft manufacturers, an approach that cut months off production schedules and allowed critical aircraft to reach the fleet faster. By 1943, the Navy was fielding improved fighters and dive bombers at unprecedented speed, thanks in no small part to Trapnell's relentless testing and clear recommendations. Still, he longed to face the enemy directly. That chance would come soon. But first, Trapnell would make perhaps his most famous contribution: unlocking the secrets of Japan's feared Mitsubishi Zero and shaping the design of America's war-winning F-6F Hellcat. By mid-1942, a rare stroke of luck handed Frederick Trapnell the intelligence prize of the Pacific War. During Japan's diversionary attack on the Aleutian Islands, pilot Tadayoshi Koga's Mitsubishi A-6M20 crash-landed nearly intact on Akutan Island, Alaska. Salvaged and shipped south, the sleek enemy fighter, long feared as untouchable in dogfights, arrived at San Diego for exhaustive testing. Naval Command knew only one man had the judgment to reveal its true strengths and weaknesses: Commander Frederick M. Trapnell. In paired flights off the California coast, Trapnell flew a brand new Vought F4U Corsair, while fellow test pilot Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders piloted the captured Zero. They staged mock duels at different altitudes and speeds, pushing both aircraft to the limit. The findings were game-changing. Trapnell reported, "The Zero was faster and climbed better than the Wildcat, but was far less stable and lost maneuverability at high speed." The supposed superfighter had exploitable flaws, vulnerabilities American pilots could turn to their advantage. Even as he decoded enemy technology, Trapnell continued refining American designs. He worked closely with Leroy Grumman on the prototype F-6F Hellcat, recommending changes to improve longitudinal stability and high-altitude performance. Grumman trusted his judgment so completely that production began before the Navy issued an official certificate. The result spoke for itself. Hellcats eventually destroyed over 5,000 Japanese aircraft, more than half of all Navy aerial victories in the war. Meanwhile, the once troublesome F4U Corsair, strengthened by Trapnell's test flights and engineering advice, emerged as a premier carrier fighter, achieving dominance across the Pacific. Through these efforts, Trapnell proved that a single, methodical test pilot could reshape the balance of air power, arming U.S. aviators with decisive knowledge and world-class machines. Yet he still yearned to join the fight directly, a desire soon fulfilled aboard the escort carrier USS Breton, and later on the front lines with Task Group 38.1. In spring 1944, after years of shaping aircraft from behind the scenes, Frederick Trapnell finally headed to the war zone. Assigned as executive officer of the escort carrier USS Breton, he oversaw the ferrying of fighters and bombers from the U.S. West Coast to forward bases. But Trapnell didn't simply deliver airplanes, he redefined how they launched. He developed a short-deck takeoff method that allowed Hellcats to become airborne in just 190 feet. dramatically increasing the number of aircraft a small escort carrier could carry. The innovation earned him the Bronze Star and immediate recognition throughout the fleet. Soon after, Trapnell was tapped as Chief of Staff to Rear Admiral Arthur Radford aboard the fast carrier USS Yorktown. From this forward-deployed flagship, he directed every facet of air operations, fuel logistics, ordnance planning, target selection, and after-action reporting during some of the Pacific War's most decisive campaigns, including the invasions of the Caroline Islands and the Philippines. But the greatest danger he faced was not enemy fire. In December 1944, Task Group 38.1 encountered Typhoon Cobra, one of the most violent storms ever recorded in the Pacific. Towering waves and hurricane winds battered the fleet, capsizing 3 destroyers and claiming more than 790 sailors' lives. Trapnell coordinated frantic efforts to save damaged carriers and shepherd surviving ships through the chaos, demonstrating cool judgment and steady leadership that helped prevent even greater losses. These combat months gave Trapnell what he had long sought: first-hand wartime command experience, while proving that his engineering mind translated seamlessly into high-stakes operational leadership. By the war's end, he was not only a legendary test pilot but also a battle-tested naval officer, uniquely prepared to guide aviation into an even more demanding era, the dawning jet age. When World War II ended, naval aviation stood at a crossroads. Jet engines promised unheard-of speed and power, but they also introduced dangers far beyond the propeller age: hotter landings, higher stall speeds, and unforgiving margins for error. The Navy needed a visionary to chart this new course, and Vice Admiral Arthur Radford, now Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Air, knew the ideal candidate. Frederick Trapnell. Radford tasked Trapnell with building a new center dedicated to testing and perfecting every future combat aircraft. By early 1947, Trapnell had full creative control over what became the Naval Air Test Center at Naval Air Station Patuxent River, Maryland. His mission was bold: train a generation of test pilots who were also engineers, capable of understanding and surviving the punishing physics of jet flight. Recruiting the best aviators from wartime squadrons, Trapnell established a culture of full-spectrum testing. Aircraft were evaluated not only for speed and climb, but also for high-altitude handling, carrier suitability, electronic systems, armament, and maintenance demands. This all-encompassing approach ensured that problems surfaced and were solved before pilots faced them in combat. The NATC quickly became the crucible of modern naval aviation. Under Trapnell's eye, prototypes like the Grumman F9 F Panther, Vought F8 Crusader, and Douglas A4 Skyhawk were put through rigorous trials, while overly ambitious designs, such as the Convair XF4U Sea Dart and Vought XF4U Cutlass, were exposed as failures early, saving lives and millions of dollars. Trapnell even flew some of the first transonic research aircraft, like the Douglas D-558 Skystreak, pushing near-supersonic speeds at Mach 0.86. By the early 1950s, NATC graduates filled the cockpits of America's newest carriers, and eventually, the Mercury and Apollo astronaut corps. Trapnell's insistence on discipline, engineering literacy, and fearless testing ensured the Navy would enter the jet and space ages not cautiously, but confidently. In 1950, Frederick Trapnell received the command he had long dreamed of: captain of the aircraft carrier USS Coral Sea. It was a fitting culmination of decades spent mastering every aspect of naval flight. Coral Sea was the first U.S. carrier to deploy with an all-jet air group, and among its complement was one of Trapnell's personal favorites, the sleek McDonnell F-2H Banshee. True to form, Trapnell did not simply command the ship, he improved it. He pioneered a double-line launch procedure, enabling jets to launch from parallel positions on the flight deck. This innovation dramatically increased sortie rates and became a model for future carrier operations. Crew members later recalled how their captain combined quiet authority with methodical precision, inspiring confidence even during the most demanding exercises. Yet the relentless pace of command took a toll. In January 1952, at only 49 years old, Trapnell was diagnosed with a serious heart ailment that abruptly ended his flying career. Though he could no longer climb into a cockpit, his achievements were already unparalleled. Over a lifetime in the air, he had logged 6,200 272 hours across 5,012 flights in 162 different aircraft types, from fragile open cockpit biplanes to near-supersonic jets. Recognizing his irreplaceable contributions, the Navy promoted him to Vice Admiral upon his retirement in September 1952. Honors followed. In 1957, the Society of Experimental Test Pilots made him one of its first honorary fellows, and in 1986, he was posthumously enshrined in the U.S. Naval Aviation Hall of Honor. Trapnell passed away in 1975, but his name endures. The main airfield at Naval Air Station Patuxent River now bears the name Trapnell Field, a permanent tribute to the man who transformed flight testing into a science and carried naval aviation from the age of fabric wings to the dawn of space exploration. Frederick M. Trapnell's influence didn't end with his retirement or even with his passing in 1975. His fingerprints remain on every carrier deck and flight line where U.S. Navy and Marine aviators prepare for duty. The Naval Air Test Center he shaped at Patuxent River became the unquestioned cradle of modern naval aviation, producing generations of pilots whose training fused engineering mastery with fearless flying discipline. Perhaps nowhere was that legacy clearer than in the space race. The first waves of American astronauts, Alan Shepard, John Glenn, Wally Schirra, Pete Conrad, James Lovell, Alan Bean, Dick Gordon, and John Young, were all graduates of the test pilot culture Trapnell designed. They carried his rigorous approach into Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions, extending his influence from the ocean's surface to the surface of the moon. Within the Navy, Trapnell's methods reshaped how aircraft are developed and deployed. From the F-14 Tomcat to today's F/A-18 Super Hornet and F-35C Lightning II, every carrier aircraft still undergoes the kind of full-spectrum evaluation he championed: speed, climb, electronics, carrier suitability, and real-world combat testing. His insistence on early collaboration with manufacturers remains standard practice, saving time, money, and most importantly, lives. Even his personal example endures. Trapnell proved that innovation does not require fame or flamboyance. It requires courageous curiosity, the willingness to question old methods, and a steady confidence under pressure, qualities that inspired thousands of naval aviators and engineers who never met him but trained in the environment he created. Today, when a U.S. Navy pilot streaks off the deck of a supercarrier, or a Marine aviator guides an F-35 through complex maneuvers, they are following a path first mapped by a man flying canvas and wire biplanes almost a century ago. From fragile torpedo bombers to supersonic jets and lunar landings, Vice Admiral Frederick M. Trapnell's vision stitched together the story of modern naval flight, a story still soaring higher with every launch.